Hey everybody, welcome to the Friday WP-Tonic Roundtable discussion. We are competing with WordCamp US this morning, so we are sort of a small group who are going to be talking a little bit about our friends who are there and what they might be experiencing and what we're missing out on. And of course, we're going to start with our news stories once we introduce the crowd. Today's show is brought to you by Intelligence WP, the plugin that actually makes sense out of your analytics. Everybody check that out at intelligencewp.com. Let's go around and introduce the roundtable. Sally, I'm going to start with you.
All right. My name is Sally Getch. My business is WP Fangirl. I build WordPress websites for small businesses and nonprofits with a focus on helping you accomplish your business goal. I'm also the organizer of the East Bay WordPress meetup in Oakland, California, and subject to the cat of adorableness, BC.
And John, how about introducing yourself to us?
Thanks, Kim. I'm John Locke. My business is Lockdown Design, and I'm also doing SEO for blue-collar industries like manufacturing. Like the song says, I can take you higher. So
nice, thank you. And I'm Kim Shivler. I am the co-host of WP-Tonic, and today I'm the full host because Jonathan Denwood is actually out having some dental work done. So we will try to fill in for him as best we can. I am a communications and technology instructor. You can find me at kimshivler.com. Let's jump into our news stories. So the first one let's talk about was a story from Yoast on those video backgrounds, as opposed to actual live video that has something to engage people, but just those moving backgrounds and how they really are not only annoying to people, but they're not good for conversion. Who wants to jump in first on this article?
I'll jump in. There's a lot of good things that he's saying when it comes to this. The funny part is by the time 2017 is done, I'm going to have launched like 4 sites with video backgrounds. And there's a line in here where he says, your clients, they see video backgrounds on other sites and then they want it. And that's basically what happens. It's a case of website envy. And, when it comes to embedding background videos, there are a lot of challenges. For example, on iPhone, you're just going to get a static image instead of a playing video, a lot of the times, because unless you have a big play button. So it kind of renders that useless. But people still, ask for them. But it's a very valid point that it's going to make your site load more slowly, and that's something that clients do need to be aware of. And that's not good for conversions. That is definitely good for usability. And in most cases, the video has to be part of the story and that the site is telling. And a lot of times it's just a random, like kind of tangentially related video, but it's not part of the actual story. And in a lot of cases, just a static image. If you're going to have a hero background, like a full width, just a static image will probably do the job just as well as a video. So
I thought the timing on this was perfect because I had just been in a discussion on Slack. I've pulled it up so I could get the exact phrasing last week. Anyone know how to improve the performance of a page that has a lot of content, 10 plus background videos, fallback background images, and other background images? As far as I know, the videos and images were compressed prior to upload, but our client, another agency who made the design, has made a couple comments about the performance of the page. Note, SEO is incredibly important to them. And, my response basically was ditch the video backgrounds. And then a couple of days later, that article came out. And, I've wrestled with this. Last year. I had a client that really wanted a big video, full screen video background on the homepage. And it was relevant, but I didn't, I tried to argue against it. They insisted on it. We set it up with the fallback image, and then it's, like, why doesn't it loop on my iPad? Well, because, you're lucky it plays on your iPad. It's a big issue, and they are a distraction. I mean, I am super distracted by anything that moves. If there's a television on in the room, I cannot pay attention to anything else. It really bothers me a lot. And so if I'm on a web page and all kinds of stuff is moving, figuring out what to do is much more difficult. And if you have a call to action, on top of that video, it's going to be essentially invisible. So you really have to see, is this, it's trendy, sliders were trendy a while ago. And, if it finally came out, oh yeah, these things are terrible for your SEO and your accessibility, and people don't actually click on them, and they're not useful. And, video is a terrific tool for things where you need to show something in action. You need to show, whether you're a keynote speaker and you want to show yourself giving a presentation, or you're demonstrating how to build something. There are a lot of terrific uses for video, but as a background, not so much. And I thought it was really interesting that the client who pushed me for the video background, he was talking about how they had a video background on Squarespace at the time, and he just loved it. Well, before we were finished with our project, Squarespace had taken that off and put a still image in. So apparently they discovered that it didn't convert very well. So yeah, use your video carefully.
Absolutely. And use it, as you said, where it counts. That's what I came away with this from. And also working on SEO and conversion. A lot of times when customers want this, they're thinking about what they want. And it's our job to push them to, but don't you really want to build what your customer wants? Is the website for you, or is it for your customer? And if it's just a vanity site, that's one thing. But if you're really building something and you want to sell something, then you should be building it for the customer. And I love that, Sally, where you said that the calls to action just become invisible at that point when they're sitting on top like that. And we need to, as people with our website, so speaking with me, building my website, I need to take my customer by the hand, give them what they want, and help them get to where I want them to be in whatever that is. And usually it's not background video. Now, I am one who uses video I'm a speaker, so I have speaking examples out there, and I teach technology. So I have some screen flows out there showing you exactly how I would teach you how to do something. But that wouldn't be appropriate for a background. It wouldn't fit at all. So I thought it was a great, very timely, because the same. I see people wanting a lot of video, even still the sliders, or a lot of animation. And it's just a spot on, distracting and bad for SEO. Good points. Let's move on to WordCamp US. So a couple of things. One, we know this is happening, and I don't know if any of you have things you're hoping to learn from it as we watch the streaming from wherever we are. Jeff Chandler had an article out there on what he would really like to see from the state of the word, because that's one of the big deals that always happens now is Matt's state of the word. And I'd like to get your feedback on that article. Sally?
Well, I think that's I have to say, if I'd been making a list, Calypso probably wouldn't have been on it, because I haven't paid much attention to it since it first came out. But I think that is an interesting point. If we're going to be encouraging people to do things like add blocks to Gutenberg, well, what about the mobile app for interacting with WordPress. How is that going to evolve next to this? Because part of the reason that I never did much with it after I first tested it was, well, it's fine if you're working on pages and posts, but if you need to work on anything else, it actually takes you over to your website. So it would be nice to hear whether there's any movement on that, or whether that just is something that they haven't had time to focus on. And the next thing is, an update on WordPress Foundation supported initiatives. And, how much money has the foundation contributed to these causes, and if any progress has been made on providing educational workshops in underdeveloped countries. That would be interesting. I hadn't been paying much attention to that. The WordPress Public Benefit Corporation, there's also supports the meetups, and I pay some attention to what's happening there. And I know many meetups all over the world have been launching in the course of the year. But that would be interesting to hear about. And then basically the requests are sort of for follow-ups on last year. What's up with the the modified release schedule, and what is what is Gutenberg really? Since Matt will be presenting after Morton's talk about Gutenberg and the future of WordPress, so I'm sure he'll have time to take it into account. Although, given most of his State of the Word presentations with the statistics from the annual surveys and that kind of thing, I know a lot of it is prepared long in advance. And those are all things that it would be good to hear about. I was really pleased to see the launch of the Gutenberg Handbook, which I think helps to explain, what it's all about, and to put things in one place where people can find them. There is a lot going on that we need to be aware of, and maybe we also want to see a step back to kind of look at the bigger picture. Most of us, the news has kind of been all Gutenberg all the time, but we'll find out what happens. I'll be out this afternoon, so I won't see many of today's talks, but I will be around tomorrow for the State of the Word, and I definitely plan to watch.
Excellent. How about you, John?
Well, definitely, as Sally said, I think it's an opportunity for Matt to lay out what the development cycle is going to be, and what the end goal of Gutenberg is. And because I think there's a lot of confusion about that, it's getting a little bit more clear, and I think some people are getting a little bit more optimistic about it. But I think it's very important, as has been stated on this show dozens of times, that the developers and the general WordPress community, not just the core team, kind of needs to know what the each of the stages in the development cycle are going to be, and what the finished product is going to look like. And if we remember, like the REST API, how long that took to actually get into core, I think it's going to be the same situation. I don't think it's going to be a couple of months. But I think people need to have a vision of where that's going. I think it's interesting that Jeff brought up Calypso, because it had been something that I had just completely forgot about, that there was a thing. And maybe that has a place in the next version of WordPress as well, and maybe that's part of the plan. Maybe it's something that they were experimenting with for .com use. Not really sure. That would be a nice thing to address. And a good thing that Jeff brought up as well is how is the foundation contributing to other programs such as Hack the Hood, Black Girls Code, the Internet Archive, which are all very worthy programs. Because I think if you're powering 25% or 28, 29% of the web, I think it's important to help nurture the next generation of technologists and programmers. And I think that's part of the responsibility that a large organization has, is to kind of give back and build that future. So
Great, thank you. I was the same. I completely forgot about Calypso. I figured the Gutenberg piece would be in there because we have talked about it so much ourselves, as the rest of the community. But I think the thing that interested me the most was the foundation information, to see where they're going with that. I thought that was really good stuff, and we will see what it actually turns out to. I have a feeling, having been at the first WordCamp US and getting to see the people, lining up to ask questions, I have a feeling a lot of those questions are going to surround Gutenberg, just because of, the buzz within the community. And and I'm traveling tomorrow. I may actually be on a plane and miss it. So we shall see. I'm not sure what time I'm, what my schedule fully is. So we've exhausted our stories. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back to talking about tips for making our WordPress sites more responsive for mobile. Welcome back, everybody. We have exhausted our news stories for the week, and we're going to start talking about making our sites mobile friendly. Before we do that, just want to remind you that our sponsor today is Intelligence WP. They make sense out of your analytics. I recommend everyone go to intelligencewp.com and check them out. We'll also have that in the show notes if you want to grab the link. Now let's get to our big talk on making our sites more responsive. And I think one of the first things we can just throw out there before I jump into other questions is it kind of comes back to that story we had on the background video. It's not the most friendly thing for your mobile site to have those. And John, you've already pointed out that some sites, for example, on certain phones, and Sally, you mentioned on the iPad, they're just not going to show it or loop it, or all these ideas that you have that look beautiful on your great big screen connected to, direct into your router, not even over Wi-Fi, they're just not going to work that way. But let's start with some other tips then. John, top tips?
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that really gets forgotten about is making your site legible on a phone. I think, typography and just, can I read this on a small screen, is something that is often ignored. I think there's a lot of cases, where on the phone, I tend to try and make font sizes at least 16 pixels. I think even 18, 20 pixels is fine. And another thing to look out for, and this even goes back to advertising, like David Ogilvy talked about this, like the contrast of the text on the background. I think there's like a trend in web design to make pale gray text on a white background, and it's terrible for contrast. I'm not sure why this even became a thing, but customers can't read it. It's not very good, and that's definitely one tip. Another thing I would say is making the tap targets, giving them enough space and making them big enough to tap. I know on some phones it's a little tough. If you got the fat fingers, you could be aimed for something, and it's still approaching it from a desktop first mentality, but I think we need to be thinking about the mobile design at this, either mobile first or at the same time thinking about how is this desktop design going to, translate into mobile, where a mouse is not available and all you have is your finger.
Nice. And so tap targets, for newbies we have, so tap targets are actually like buttons where you're going to push on them as opposed to click with a mouse. And that is one I have had just recently horrible things with, trying to find something and get there and not be able to get it to work at all on my phone. So that's really good point, as well as the contrast. And contrast isn't just for mobile, it's for all accessibility. We need to have more of that. And I agree. In fact, I just put in a theme that I have to go change all the CSS because it's like gray text on white. And I'm getting slammed for it. How about you, Sally? Top tips.
John covered some really good points there, and text size and contrast, and that does matter both on desktop and on mobile. Making sure that you take advantage of WordPress's responsive images so that you're not sending a large image down to a small device over a slow connection. And, people do often have slow connections and they can't load these really heavy web pages very easily. So anything you can do to lighten up the weight is good, to make sure everything is compressed, because if your site seems a little sluggish on the desktop, just imagine how slow it's going to be over a 3G connection. And there was something else I had in mind, but it has escaped me temporarily. But also that you want to think about how you're structuring your navigation. And that if you have three levels deep of accordion menus, that's probably not going to translate really well onto mobile, and you want to sort of rethink this and say, okay, how can I actually do this in a small list? What is it really important that people get to from the homepage, and how can I then direct them someplace else? I was just writing a little code to add some to add a collapsible grid of child pages at the bottom of parent pages, and so you have to think about those kinds of things. And of course, Google has warned us for the entire year now, if not longer, about pop-up ads that are difficult, if not impossible, to close on mobile. They're a pain in the butt on desktop, but they may make it actually impossible to proceed on your phone, which is why the phones are now shipping with ad blockers built in. And if you can't make your ads less than annoying, people are going to refuse to look at them at all. And I don't have an ad blocker installed, but basically if I go to your site and I can't navigate it because of the ads, I won't go back.
Very good point. I actually do have an ad blocker, and something I was researching for the fact that I have forgotten command line Unix because I haven't used it in so long and had to use it. I had to SSH into something this week, and every time I looked, it was this same company that kept coming up first. And every time I click, it'd say, "I'm sorry, we won't let you in because it appears you have an ad blocker." I was like, I'm on the desktop, but I don't care. Cancel you, go find somebody else, because I do keep my ad blockers on. Very great tips from both of you. What about, so these are some overall ones. Let's talk about the importance of AMP, the accelerated mobile pages that Google's really been pushing. how are you working with that with your clients, and how has that changed some of your development strategy?
Hardly at all. I mean, when it first came out, I installed it in a couple of places, and I've followed the news on it a little bit, and almost everybody seems to include that AMP is bad for your website, and that although it does produce a version of your page with that's lightweight and fast and with design stripped out, which is all good in theory. It seems mainly to be of benefit to Google and not to you as a site owner. And the people who would mostly be interested in using it is if you are actually a news outlet of some kind. So if you publish an online magazine or a newspaper, this may be a good thing for you. If you are an ordinary person out there with a website, there's a good chance your AMP pages will hardly be noticed or picked up anywhere anyway. But there have been a lot of issues with them in terms of it does not prove to be particularly good for your SEO as promised.
I think with the AMP, the types of sites that benefit from it, at least right now, are more news or media sites. Those sites seem to get a little bit of boost. As for regular sites, I'm not so sold on them, having an SEO benefit from AMP. I do think that there will be a point where AMP is different from what it is now and has a little bit more robustness to it. And I think at that point you're going to see more sites use AMP and integrate it. And that's definitely something you can do. There's a AMP plugin. I think it's made by Automatic, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's AMP glue, like a plugin that basically like glues together like WordPress and AMP.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it a lot easier to integrate. I would say if you're publishing mostly like a blog, I would say that AMP is something that I would strongly consider. I would say that if you have something like an e-commerce site, that I would maybe hold off on that for now.
Okay. Interesting. One of the things I'd like to ask you about, John, because you do work with a lot of local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I had read, and it came out of Google, but I haven't followed it since, was that they were saying because a lot of people were searching for local businesses on their phones, like you're out and about looking for a restaurant near you or something, that the AMP pages would be given preference in a mobile search. Have you actually seen that come to pass or worked with that at all?
Like I said, I've seen it. I've seen a little bit of evidence for like regular business sites that
Mm-hmm.
maybe like it has a little bit to do with it. I do know that for local news stories and stuff like that, there'll be like a little section, kind of like how you have that strip of images. There'll be a strip of like AMP stories near the top. I haven't necessarily seen that on every like business search, because depending on how you search, what you search for, it's going to throw different things up there. It could be a knowledge panel. It could be, shopping stuff at the top and on the side. I've seen the AMP triggered a lot when it's more like people just searching for news, not so much for business. I think there's probably a little bit of boost, but I wouldn't say it's like a substantial, boost for business.
Excellent. Thank you. Because one of the things I try to keep in mind when I'm working with people and teaching, since I don't actually build sites anymore, is that sometimes strategies for local businesses and more generic blogs or e-commerce sites can be highly different. So you want to make sure, right, that you're talking to people who work in that local space if you are that local barbershop or restaurant or anything like that out there.
Oh yeah, most definitely, yeah.
Any other big things that come to mind as far as do's or don'ts, maybe a couple of top don'ts that we want to do when we are building something that we want to have be friendly for our mobile devices?
I would say, one tip that I would give is go in your Google Search Console, and under search traffic, there'll be a link for mobile usability. If you scan that, you're going to see Google usually tell you, things like your content is too wide for this screen, or your tap targets are too close. Different things like that. Usually the content's too wide for the screen is the one that I get. One way to deal with that is to have overflow X hidden in your CSS. That's one way to deal with that. And I would say the biggest issue when it comes to mobile is just speed. Anything that you can do to make your mobile site faster is a good idea. If you have background images, serve a smaller image on mobile first, and then when it goes to desktop, maybe like a bigger image. And as Sally mentioned, definitely do take advantage of responsive images. It's already built into WordPress. So, have that enabled, don't disable it, so.
Excellent. Thank you. Sally, any last words on responsive or being mobile friendly? You're muted.
I am muted. That must have been the train going by. We've had responsive design long enough by now that, if you're not building mobile friendly sites, you've really missed the boat. And almost any theme that you can start with is going to be at least minimally responsive. But test things like the menus and how they actually work, because there are better and worse implementations of a lot of things. And sometimes it turns out, I'm not sure what it was, but somebody, I got an email from somebody, I'm on your site and I can't make the, on my phone, and I can't make the menu work. And I went and I'm like, well, that's funny because it worked before. But, so I ended up, taking out the menu that was in there and putting in a different mobile menu so that it would work. And so, you need to make sure that it's not just that it theoretically works, but that it actually works when someone tests it. And there are lots of tools out there that will assess things like your speed and your tap targets and your overall mobile friendliness. So, make use of them. And a lot of the challenge is in dealing with clients or with designers who come from a print background. And having to explain to them that okay, so how is this going to work on someone's phone? This clever design idea of yours, how is this going to work on someone's phone? Because some things are not very suitable, or they have to be really, that you can't just do this sort of compress and stack. That is the most common way of dealing things. You're going to have to do something quite different, and then that takes more effort and more build time and is going to cost them more money. And so how important is it to them to have that? And you will find sites that do some really spectacular things that that also include special layouts for really wide screens, but it is mainly, can people still read and get to the content? Do you have to think about things like, well, if you're envisioning your desktop layout and that there's going to be something extremely useful in the sidebar that you're hoping people are going to pay attention to and include, well, that's going to be on the bottom. Unless you've set your sidebar to show up before the content, which you probably don't want the whole sidebar to do. And therefore, where are you going to put things? Where are you going to hook things in your site? Do you want to actually include something within the content at the end of the content? And if you are putting some kinds of calls to action in, you probably don't want them in the sidebar or don't want them only in the sidebar. If people are going to see them, if you have some kind of secondary navigation of subpages, you're probably going to want to put it, at the top of the content or somewhere within the content, as opposed to in the sidebar, if you want it to still be useful on smaller devices.
Excellent. Thank you. You guys have given us some really great tips. The sidebars are a big one. The going and looking in the Google Search Console and just learning, great stuff. I would say I even have trouble, not even just on the phone, but end users who are working on their sites, having them call me, and they've spent hours and hours and hours trying to get the text here and this here, and even not just on a phone, but when I show them 4 different computer screens and how that's going to switch around because they're just doing it on their one display, we've got to get people out of that mindset of this is not print. When you lay out print, you lay out print. When you lay out a website, it should be something completely different, not just from a mobile perspective. I think we've had a great show this week. We're going to wrap, and I'm sure next week we'll all have lots of stuff to talk about from people coming back from WordCamp US and everything that went on there that we are missing. Thanks for joining us. Before we wrap, I'm going to go back around and have the roundtable tell us where we can find them. Let's go ahead and start with you again, Sally.
Okay, you can find me at WPFangirl.com. I am at Sally Getch on Twitter, and the East Bay WordPress meetup is eastbaywp.com.
Thank you. John?
Excellent. You can find me at my website, which is lockdowndesign.com, lockdown_ on Twitter, and my Facebook page and LinkedIn are both Lockdown Design. So
great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm kimshivler.com, Twitter at Kim Shivler. So tweet at me and I will tweet back. We will see you guys next Wednesday where we will have a guest interview of another person involved in the WordPress community. And next Friday, where, as I said, we'll, I'm sure, have an active roundtable discussion on WordCamp US as well as news stories for that week. We'll see everybody next week. Bye.
Bye.